Hello everyone, welcome to Experiential Spirituality, episode 21, The End of This Age. My name is David McMurdo, but you may remember me as paranormal investigator, cryptid hunter, and mystery delver. At least that's what my Twitter account said. My Twitter account has seen 400% usage in the last week. There's two things that stem from that bio. First of all, I had this mindset for many years, like over a decade on the internet, where I was going to have my social media accounts be like always pristine. So I would frequently go back and remove older videos that I wasn't quite happy with or didn't quite fulfill a purpose. On my Twitter account, I would frequently go back and remove tweets. And I've just decided to give that all up and just use these accounts more lightly, I suppose. It's far easier that way. In terms of what that bio says, in my book I talk about how since we are transcendent spirit, and since we are by definition ineffable, we shouldn't categorize ourselves in any way. There are so many, especially in the present age, there are so many individuals whose entire identity is wrapped around some really superficial element of themselves, like their sexuality or their sex, for example. And in the book I explain that's a terrible idea because we are limitless consciousness, and if we identify ourselves within such tight confines, then we're limiting ourselves essentially, and our experience of reality will be affected in that way. However, as I also say in the book, the issue is that when you're talking to other souls, you do need to present yourself as something. You do need to have a label for yourself that allows them to know what you're about very quickly. The important thing is that you don't take such labels so seriously yourself. Now, that is going to be very relevant given what I talk about later on. Ever since I started covering topical issues on this live stream, I've had so much subject matter, like too much subject matter to talk about each week because so much happens in a week. But in this episode, just to give you a preview, I'm going to be talking about watching the Euro, the football thing last Sunday, talking about the ongoing dialogue I'm having with the treasure unit here in Scotland, see if I can find a loophole when it comes to finding treasure. This kid that went missing this week, a rather amusing story, as strange as that sounds. Gnosticism as the boogeyman. A good example of trolling, because I think it was last week I talked about how trolling should not be conflated with making death threats because they are separate things. Real trolling is funny and it's intelligent, and I've got a good example of that this week. I'm going to talk a bit more about the vaccine mandates and what's going on with the lockdown and so forth. And the main subject of this show, every episode I have a main subject, and that's where the title of the episode is derived from. The main subject of this show stems from the fact that we are living at the end of our current age, and I want to talk about the implications of that. And in doing so, I'll talk about Lemuria. I guess one of the main features of this episode is the adventure I went on this week. I got lots of footage that I'm going to play for you. I'm going to talk about my little escapade, because this was really day one of looking for the phantom cats in preparation as a form of fieldwork for my next book, essentially. Then I'm going to talk about normies, trickster figures, and personality types, and there will probably be more in there as well, but that's just what my show notes say, and I tend to go on from them and see how things go organically. So last Sunday there was some football thing, and I have to say that because I've never been into sport at all. It's a bit of a cliche because a lot of people say this, but it's true for me, is that I'm not really into sport, but I don't resent it. I don't have a problem with it. And if there's a major event like the World Cup, then yeah, I'll watch it. And so last Sunday there was some Euro thing, I don't know what it was, but England were playing Italy. Now, because I don't have a TV, I have no means of watching it live, and it's very hard to find such matches online live. So I ended up watching the live stream of the Sun newspaper, but their live stream, which was free, wasn't showing the football match itself. It was cutting between an audience in England, or a crowd in England, and a crowd in Italy, which actually in some ways I would prefer over the football itself, because Italian women are something else. I used to go out with this woman from Sardinia, which is not, of course, mainland Italy, but close enough, and they are just amazing. So yeah, I'd probably rather look at some Italian women than a bunch of guys kicking a ball around. But it was very exciting, and honestly, it's heresy for a Scot to say this, but I was rooting for England. You know, as a Scot, you're practically obligated to root against them and to celebrate their defeat, but that wasn't the case for me. I was very much rooting for them. So I was very happy when they scored that goal in the first 2 minutes, and I honestly thought they had it set, but unfortunately not. And because I'm not invested in these things, of course, although I was rooting for England, I'm perfectly happy for Italy as well. But the fallout from that has been just ridiculous. I mean, there was so much in that I don't want to talk about, because I think that other YouTubers, I know that Sargon of Akkad, you know, Carl Benjamin, he's gone into the politics of that whole affair. And one thing I don't want to do in this show is just repeat what you can hear on 50 other channels. And I think I do a good job of not doing that by looking at things from a spiritual perspective. I just wanted to mention that I had watched that, and it is something that I concern myself with if there's some kind of major event going on. But one thing that I've noticed about football, and I thought initially it was just me, and of course I'm sure those of you in America know that when I say football I really mean soccer. One thing I've noticed is that, you know, I used to visit my granddad's house when I was younger. My granddad, he's been dead for a few years now, but quite often when I'd go into his house, he'd be sitting there watching the football, and I'd just sit there and watch it with him, even though I wasn't really into it. And I always felt it was kind of boring. It was mostly boring, but whenever a player got near to the goal, then it became interesting and you focus. Then they either score or something else happens, and then that's it. And I thought that was just me as someone who was not into football, but as I'm watching the English crowd and the Italian crowd on this live stream last Sunday, I noticed that they seem to feel the same way. Like, when the game is being played and no one is near a goal, they're just talking among themselves, they're not even looking at the screen. So I thought that was just me, but apparently even die-hard football fans themselves who are willing to paint themselves up and go out onto the streets, apparently even they feel the same way. I deep cleaned my bathroom and my kitchen this week. You know, there is something to be said about having a clean environment beyond the way that someone like Jordan Peterson would express it. You know, Jordan Peterson, he's become something of a meme. There's a meme that says, you know, clean your room, bucko, derived from one of his 12 rooms for life. And Jordan Peterson's logic for cleaning your room, the importance of cleaning your room, is essentially about something that I talk about as well, which is making whatever changes you can make within whatever influence you have. You know, if your living space isn't well ordered, if your environment isn't clean, then why are you worried about things that are going on halfway around the world, for example? And that makes a lot of sense. But I think there's something even more important about having a nice, clear and clean environment beyond that, more into the feng shui territory. Because I definitely feel better when my environment is clean. And, you know, when I walk to a clean bathroom, when I walk to a clean kitchen, my mind is just more focused in those clean environments. And it's very important for me to remember to do those things because, as I said, was it last week or the week before, I have some of the meme autism, however you want to describe that obsessiveness, that focus on things. So when I work on a project, I will happily let my environment deteriorate for months on end. It'd been a long time since my bathroom or my kitchen had seen a good clean, so I finally got that done this week. This room and the hallway and my bedroom will be up at some point. So to go on to this issue of communicating with the treasure unit, I'm not getting much out of them, and just to restate the situation, it's law here in Scotland, and Scotland does have rather unique laws compared to Ireland, England and Wales. But it's the law here in Scotland that if you find a treasure, you have 20 or 30 days to report it, otherwise you could face fines or even a prison sentence. If you do report it and you hand this treasure over, and let's say a museum has some interest in it, you may, emphasis on the may, get a reward, But if you found the treasure on someone else's land, that reward would probably be split between you as the finder and them as the landowner. And I don't like that, because I feel that if I find something in this land, some Pictish artifact, that as much belongs to me as it does to anyone else. I know what the law says, but I'm saying differently. And I feel, I have no use for ancient artifacts lying around at all. I just think I should be guaranteed a reward. See, I don't like the idea of handing over some treasure to enrich someone else, which it certainly would, and then possibly be left with nothing. So what I've been asking the treasure unit here in Scotland, once over Twitter, and I emailed them a few days ago, I still haven't received a response, is this. What if I find a cache of treasure, say, a site where there is treasure, but I don't take anything, so I'm not in possession of any treasure? Am I still obligated to report that by law? Am I obligated to report the location of treasure? Because if I'm not, then theoretically, if I stumbled upon some treasure cache or some treasure lying out there, I could hold it to ransom. I could say, yeah, I'll tell you where the treasure is. Here's some nice photographs of it, but I'm not going to do that until you guarantee me what I'm owed, until you guarantee me a reward for being the guy who, on his own effort and on his own dime, went out there and found this thing. That's all. Now, I don't know if they haven't responded to me because they're just so busy, because they're not active, which I doubt, or if, what I like to think is that they're secretly seething. I like to think they're sitting there going, damn it, he's found a loophole. Maybe not. I doubt I'm the first individual to try and think of loopholes like this, but I just want to hear what their stance is. And I've made clear to them, I'm speaking hypothetically. I'm not saying I'm in possession of anything, but if I was to find a treasure site and not take anything, am I obligated to report it? So that's still ongoing. I very much like an answer from them. So there was an amusing thing that happened up here this week involving a missing kid, which, those kind of stories usually aren't amusing, but this kid, he was 13 years old, and I would put the news story on screen, but I'm probably in dodgy territory there, because we're talking about like a teenager. But the police of the Highlands and Islands, they put, as they often do, they put this notice up on Facebook saying, hey, this person is missing, and they had a photo of the person. He's seen around this area. And that often happens. Then a few days later, they'll either announce that they found a body that they think is this person, or that the person has been found safe and well. But what happened in this case, and what entertained everyone, was that the 13-year-old kid who was reported missing on one of these posts, he actually showed up on the post and started commenting. He was taunting the police, and there were hundreds upon hundreds of comments, because this guy, he was talking about how he was in a little gang, and how the police deserve to be given the runaround and things like this. So there were people like around here in this community that were absolutely furious at him for wasting police time. They were saying, there's other people missing here, and you're taking up valuable resources playing these stupid games. You're going to end up in a juvenile detention center and things like this. And okay, there's a lot of validity to those points. You will certainly wasting police time. But what I was low-key thinking, observing this going down? I was thinking, I appreciate a good old-fashioned scamp. He's not out there knifing old women. He's not out there robbing people. He's not out there throwing bricks through windows. He's just a good old-fashioned scamp who decided, for whatever reason, to give the police a runaround. Now, eventually, they caught him, because I left a message, as many others were. I left a message to him saying, the problem is, this seems like a good idea. If you're annoyed at something, it seems like a good idea to run away from home. But at that age, what quickly occurs to you is that you can't live off bags of crisps forever. And, eventually you're going to miss your Xbox, you're going to miss warm meals. Because as far as I can tell, he lives a really nice family life. It's not like so many kids, especially a lot of the kids that I grew up with, they were in foster care and they had negligent guardians. It wasn't like that at all. I mean, the photo that the police used of him was of him on Christmas Day receiving a new Xbox, so he seemed to have a really nice family life. I don't know what his problem was. It could have been just basic teen angst. But yeah, when you're that age, you think you can run off into the hills and just somehow live. But, when you finish that bag of crisps you took with you, when you finished that Mars bar, you suddenly realize that no, you're going to get hungry out there and it gets cold. But, while everyone else was really angry, well, most individuals were really angry at this little kid. I was secretly rooting for him, honestly. The police, unfortunately, did capture him within 24 hours, and I don't know what happened to him after that. But it was nice to see a good old-fashioned scamp, and that's all I wanted to say. Something else I saw this week, and this is a phenomenon that I've seen for many years. It's something I talk about in the book, and I'm going to read a little bit from my book on this subject, which is that within mainstream Christianity, Gnosticism is seen as such a bogeyman. It's seen as this thing, there's that meme that says, everyone I don't like is Hitler, and it's a picture of Hitler sliding down a rainbow. There needs to be a meme directed, and that of course is directed at the left. There needs to be a meme directed at the trad right that says everything that I don't like is Gnosticism. Because every single time they're talking about something that they don't like, in this case it was critical race theory, they say it's Gnostic. It's Gnostic. And there's a certain spirit within mainstream Christianity that causes them to lie about Gnosticism. It's been going on for nearly 2,000 years now. I'm going to read you an excerpt from my book on this subject, and this is a particularly, I don't know, vivid example, I guess. So this is from chapter 5. I say, up until a major cache of documents was uncovered at Nag Hammadi, Egypt in 1945, the find that resulted in the discovery of the mostly complete Coptic manuscript of the Gospel of Thomas, academics were almost entirely reliant upon the historical opponents of the Gnostics for their information about Gnosticism, information that there is good reason to doubt. For example, a 4th century Cyprian bishop known as Epiphanius of Salamis claimed that a Gnostic group called the Borborites drank the menstrual fluid of its female members and consumed fetuses with honey, pepper, and spices. You would struggle to find writings that exude as much zealous hatred as his do, so much so that it's hard to imagine anyone ever believing them to be trustworthy. But of course, there are plenty of Christian religionists even now that will cite them as if they are just that. This is of no surprise to me, because I have yet to encounter a Christian religionist that knows anything about the Gnostics beyond that which such blatant propaganda asserts, but they readily accept such obvious nonsense simply because it suits their primitive and spiritually bereft sectarian tribalism to do so. And I was going to call this episode Fetuses and Honey, because I thought that would be funny, but I decided not to in the end. But that illustrates how this has been going on for centuries. Of course, in the early centuries, the main opponent of proto-Orthodox Christianity was Gnosticism. And somehow this animosity and this willingness to lie about the opposition has just echoed down the centuries through the mainstream churches to the point where it persists even now. So whether it's critical race theory or anything else that those on the trad right don't like, they just accuse it of being Gnostic in some way. But it's a lot of nonsense. These individuals don't know anything about Gnosticism. They demonstrably don't know anything about Gnosticism. In this case, it was a Twitter account called Cauldron Pool, which sometimes it posts good content. But this time they posted this article trying to say that critical race theory had its origins in Gnosticism. But as is always the case when they do this, they don't prove that. They just assert it. They never cite primary sources to illustrate their point. They don't try and make logical connections between what the ancient Gnostics actually said and what, for example, critical race theorists say. And they don't do that because they can't. They are playing their audience to a very large degree. There's a guy that many of you will know. He's also on Twitter, and I'm fed up with him now. A guy called James Lindsay. I said to him this week, look, you don't know anything about Gnosticism. You just don't. You keep referring to it, but you don't know anything about it. He and whoever wrote the article on Cauldron Pool Individuals like that who evoke Gnosticism in that way, they are playing their audience essentially, because they know that their audience, being mainstream Christians, they've heard of this thing called Gnosticism before, and to them it's a boogeyman. So they know that they can rile up their emotions by merely evoking the word Gnosticism. So they are playing their audience, and their audience deserve to be played for being willfully ignorant, but they are playing their audience, and you can prove beyond doubt that they're making this up, because, well, you can try it for yourself. The next time you see someone refer to something in the modern day like critical race theory as Gnosticism, just ask them to substantiate it. And that's a reasonable request, right? Just ask them to draw a logical connection between what the ancient Gnostics taught and what those on the extreme left are teaching through critical race theory and things like that. They won't be able to do that because there is no connection whatsoever. If anything, the ancient Gnostics would be in direct opposition to critical race theory and other modern ideologies like that. But they don't care, because their understanding of what Gnosticism is, such as that understanding is, it's not derived from what the ancient Gnostics said. It's not derived from primary sources. It's derived from the likes of that bishop who claimed that this Gnostic group was eating fetuses with honey. It's derived from raving zealots like Irenaeus. It's not derived from the Gnostics, and that is bad history, by the way. Whenever you're looking at any subject in history, what you want are primary sources. A primary source being a source that is primary, that comes from the group that you're looking at. What these individuals are doing are driving their understanding from entirely untrustworthy and dubious secondary sources, those who merely wrote about the Gnostics, in this case their most hated opponents. And propaganda has always been the same. Like at the end of World War I, for example, there were stories here in Britain about how German soldiers were killing babies, and there were images of German soldiers holding dead babies on the end of their bayonets. It was completely made up, of course, but that's the nature of propaganda. And that's exactly what the early church fathers and the likes of that later bishop, that's what they were doing against the Gnostics. And these trad-right Christians, they just take that as given because they want to believe it. They don't care about the facts. They're never going to go to a primary source. They're never going to read the Gospel of Thomas. They're never going to read the Apocryphon of John. They're not going to do that because they're not interested in the truth. They're only interested in perpetuating their completely false religious narrative. And so that was going to be the main subject of this episode this week, but I thought the end of this age was a more important subject. So yeah, I just wanted to briefly mention that. Now, I mentioned last week or the week before trolling, and how the best trolling is really fun and how it's really smart. And there was a good example of that this week on Twitter, which I'm going to show you now. This guy here, Hugo Turner, so he's been trolling the anti-lockdown, anti-vaccine people, of which I am one. But when I say anti-vaccine people, I don't mean individuals who are opposed to vaccines as a whole, because I've never met anyone like that. I mean individuals who have doubts about this vaccine or who refuse to get this vaccine. But this guy has been trolling them. And, even though I'm on the side of these people, well, in the sense that I agree with them, this is why I don't like belonging to any collective, because this guy was just playing these people. They could not see how obvious a troll he was, and that's a sign of good trolling. It's a sign of very intelligent trolling. So this guy says, I remember a time when enrolling in a medical experiment was voluntary, she says, and you usually got paid for it. And so he comes in and says, freeloader. She says, nope, not at all. I've never taken part in one. Even worse, why wouldn't you? Why not try to further human understanding? Because you're a freeloader. Have you seriously come into this thread to have a go at me because I decided not to take part in a clinical trial? He says, I'm just anti-freeloaders. Now it looks like I found one. You think you did, but actually you didn't. How many trials have you taken part in? I'm assuming quite a significant number, considering your convictions not to be a freeloader. Okay, so this is the point where you've got to see that he's trolling. You know, this is the first point you should get a clue that he's trolling. I was one of the first to take part in the polio and rabies vaccines, actually. And she says, in the 1950s, well, as a mature man, which, you know, you can see from his photo, he's not a mature man, certainly not that old. Well, as a mature man, I'm sure you'll know by now that a clinical trial is worthless without a control group. I am happily in this control group, you're welcome. At least I wasn't the one too scared of an IFR of 0.15% to go running for a jab over more vulnerable people. 1950s, this was in 2013. I was the first one in the country to get it. What world are you living in? Cuckoo land. And the control group to validate your exemplary contribution to science. Why would you need a control group for something that makes you feel group? I think you meant to say good. I swear. So this is the bit where he's obviously trolling. I swear, since I have had the jab, I don't really have any worries anymore. Job stress gone, life stress gone, being more compliant feels good. So if there was any doubt before, with that tweet, you know he's a troll. That's a psychosomatic response. Well done, you're conditioned. Be conditioned with me. After the vaccine, I feel so pure. You feel so pure with experimental chemicals in you. Pure as snow. It took all my stress away. I feel great. You should join us. So, for days, I think he's still ongoing actually. For days, this guy has just been leaving just been trolling people essentially. And, you know, obviously I saw he was trolling straight away, so I decided to follow his account just so I could amuse myself on Twitter and see his posts. And he followed me back, you know, kind of an unspoken acknowledgement, like, I know what you're doing here, I'm not going to participate, but it is funny. And so that's trolling. You know, when I was speaking about how trolling is subtle, how it's intelligent, and how it's funny, that's trolling. You know, it's not making death threats or anything like that. And the reason the powers that be want to conflate, you know, trolling with making death threats is, well, as you well know, so many people now on social media, they call any form of disagreement trolling. You know, if someone disagrees with them, oh, they're immediately a troll. Now, if troll has been conflated with making death threats, i.e. with a criminal offence, then you're blurring the lines between disagreeing with someone and committing a criminal offence, even if it's only harassment. So that's why the powers that be want to conflate trolling with illegal activity, like making death threats, like harassment, because they want to save themselves the hassle of receiving perfectly valid criticism, quite simply. I mean, that's why they're doing it. It's just a game they're playing on everyone. So, tomorrow is apparently Freedom Day in England, and actually, if you look at it, for the average person, there's going to be very little difference in terms of the measures that exist and the measures that don't exist. It's mostly of benefit to, like, cinemas, for example. I think they're allowed to open up to full capacity, but masks are still recommended. Here in Scotland, it's different, because what Scotland and Wales tend to do is that they never want to be seen to emulate England. So what they'll do is they'll follow England, but they'll do it like a week or two later. So this week, our First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, she was on TV and she was laying out what the rules will be from tomorrow onwards, with a view on our Freedom Day being sometime in August. But she started laying out all of these rules, and I was watching the live broadcast on Twitter, and I'm just thinking, who is following this? Who's listening to this? Because she starts going into detail about how, okay, so in this kind of venue, you're allowed up to 5 people from 3 different households. In this kind of venue, you're allowed up to 8 people from 10 different households, and giving a big list of these things. And I'm just sitting there listening to her, and I'm thinking to myself, who is sitting there taking notes, and who is wandering around in their day-to-day lives thinking to themselves, okay, what kind of location is this? Okay, so there should only be 3 people from 4 households here at the most. No one is doing that. No one in the country is doing that. And for me, it highlighted another important point, which is that this kind of melodramatic fascination, this obsessing over these archaic, these obscure rules, it's something for the middle class. It's something for the middle class to do when they've got nothing better to do. But as I've kept saying, the average person just has better things to do than remember all these stupid rules. And that's the reason that when I go out, and I'm not wearing my mask, of course, I go into any shop I want, I'm not wearing a mask. Most of the people in there are not wearing a mask. They're certainly not standing there thinking to themselves, how many households do these 8 people in this shop come from? And is that... No one is thinking that. No individual with any kind of life is thinking that, because they've got better things to do. They're thinking about, have I got to pick the kids up at 2 or 4 o'clock today? They're thinking about whether they're still going to have a job next week. They're thinking about the things they need to think about in order to survive. This idea that they can sit around contemplating all of these complicated rules, it's an illusion of the middle class. It's a luxury for the middle class, because they have time to sit around thinking about this kind of thing and making this out to be all important. This was really well illustrated earlier this week when there was a news story where this reporter was really shocked down in England because she went out to some beach, and I guess what she was hoping to see were people being responsible. This was on a really hot day, by the way. I guess what she was hoping to see was people being really responsible, sitting apart on the beach in masks, I guess. But she was horrified because when she got down to that beach, there was just people running around on the beach like normal. They were having a whale of a time and going in the sea, and they were interacting with each other as normal humans do, and she was just appalled. But again, it's because these are just your average working class people. This is probably one of the few occasions in this month that they'll have to have a good time, and they're going to make use of it, because tomorrow, they're back in the factory. Tomorrow they're back working in the shop. Tomorrow they're back in the call centre. That's the reality for those people. And it's a reality that the middle class just can't connect with. That's why they can sit there coming up with all these obscure rules, completely detached from the realities of the average person. And it's so irresponsible as well, because you've got these members of parliament and these ministers thinking up all these rules in a vacuum. They think, okay, this would be logical for this. But because they don't know the realities of individuals who work in different industries, they don't understand the impact that it's going to have on different individuals. So it's okay, for example, to mandate that individuals must wear a mask at all times, but a lot of those individuals are going to be wearing them for over 8 hours a day in really hot, oppressive environments, something that just wouldn't occur to those ministers, assuming they would even care in the first place. So I'll turn to the comments now. Bugsy Malone says, hello. Where's the hidden hand? Have you ever watched the God Culture on YouTube? No, I haven't, actually. Tate says, the religionist animosity stems from the Gnostics identifying Yahweh as the demiurge. Yes, that is a major problem for them. Where's the hidden hand? Same in Kuwait, about throwing babies out of their cots. Oh yes, I remember that one as well, of course. And in that case, the one who did that was completely exposed, wasn't she? Greta says, just popping in to say hi, we'll catch up later today. Where's the hidden hand? Freedom Day. Yeah, the assumption being that the government is the one that grants us our freedom in the first place. I've come to appreciate the American cultural perspective on this very much, because of course Britain and especially Scotland, they're very, very secular places, and so not having a constitution, we don't grow up with the same sense that Americans do, or at least used to. We don't grow up with the same sense that, look, our rights are not something that the government can... Our rights are not something that the government can claim, and they're not something that the government can withhold. We just grow up thinking, well, the rights are given to us by our government. Whereas in America, there's more a sense that, no, thanks to the Constitution and the Founding Fathers largely, There's a sense that no, these rights belong to man, and they are granted to man, not by other men, but by God. And I've, living through all of these different changes in our society, I've really come to appreciate that, because if you don't have God in the picture, as most in this country don't, if you don't have God in the picture, then the highest authority can only be the state. If you don't have God, you're going to replace it with something else. And as I say in my book, in fact, it's almost always going to be state power. And so, yeah, so many people in this country don't think there's anything wrong with the idea that the government can grant us a freedom day, because as far as they're concerned, it's the government's business to grant and withhold freedom as they see fit, when it's not. And that's what I've said from the very beginning. That's why I've never obeyed any of these rules, because you can't take from me what you didn't give me. You can't take the freedom that God granted me away because you didn't grant me it in the first place. Like, I was speaking to someone this week, and it's a line I'm using more and more. I'm just flat out saying, if they say, are you exempt? And I'll say, as I said before, I don't play games. I don't make pretenses. I don't make excuses for myself. I say, yeah, I'm exempt. God gave me an exemption. Argue with that. Argue with my deeply held religious convictions. God gave me an exemption. End of story. So, yeah, completely agree. It's the very idea of the government granting us a freedom day is laughable. Tate says, "I'll tell you what freedom is to me. No fear. I mean, really, no fear." It's a quote from Nina Simone, who I'm not familiar with. Good quote, though. Where's the hidden hand? I was totally shocked not when Sajid pinged for the Kuf absolute gang of fraudulent lies. I don't understand that. People complaining on social media about being pinged, because in this country you can apparently get an NHS app for your phone, and I think it pings you if you might have been in contact with someone who has the virus of late. And there's people on social media complaining about this, but they can uninstall it, right? They don't have to have the app, right? I mean, that's not a rhetorical question. They're not obliged to have the app, as far as I know, so they can just uninstall it and forget about it. Misail Romanum says, "Come to England, we can go clubbing." I'd bloody love to go to England. I love England. The last time, I haven't been to England in ages. When I was a kid, I went down to London, and I can't remember when that was. I say as a kid, but I must have been a teenager by that point, because the London Eye was there. And, I remember from my childhood seeing the London Eye going up in the first place. And when I was in London, I went to the obvious tourist places. I went to Madame Tussauds, for example, and a bunch of other places, but I really loved London. The last time I went to England, I went to Newcastle, which is arguably a different beast from, obviously, places like London and so forth. But, yeah, I went to Newcastle because I met a girl from there, and so she took me around Newcastle, and again, a really, really nice place. I think that in terms of personhood, I'm more inclined towards England. Like, if you look whenever there's an election in this country and you see the voting patterns, England Conservative, Scotland SNP, and so on. So yeah, in terms of my personhood, I'm more in line with the English, essentially. And this is one of the reasons I don't want... And again, I don't get invested in worldly matters to the degree where I'm going to be upset if things don't go my way, because, as one great mystic said, I don't mind. I don't mind. But the way I feel about the union between Scotland and England and Wales and Ireland and so forth is that they bring balance to one another. Because again, when you see after an election day the map of the results, Scotland overwhelmingly SNP. Well, not overwhelmingly SNP in terms of raw numbers, but in terms of the way our electoral system works, yes. Whereas England is still very, very conservative. And so you've got Scotland, which is very, very lefty, if you want to put it that way, and England, which is more to the right. And so I feel these two balance each other out in a very necessary way. And I dread to think what would happen, especially living here, if Scotland got independence and I'm having to live under the SNP, who have made very clear that they're not a big fan of freedom of expression at all. So, yeah. I do like England, and I do like the English as well. So, another thing that's come into play, I'm sure you've heard in France, they are now mandating vaccines for health workers, which has caused massive protests and is going to cause massive riots. And it brings to mind the slippery slope, or the so-called slippery slope fallacy. This is the kind of thing that bothers me, right? Not bothers me, but you know what I mean. It's just of note, is that the slippery slope is called a fallacy. So whenever you point out that governments are taking liberties, for example, and that they're going to start here, but they're going to end up here. You know, they're going to do this to begin with, but then they're going to do this, then they're going to do this. Someone will come in who's read Wikipedia too much and they'll say, oh, there's the slippery slope fallacy. Well, you know, just because you call the slippery slope phenomenon a fallacy, that doesn't make it so. As far as I can tell, the slippery slope is just observable reality. It happens all the time. And it's the way authoritarian governments get their way. The founder of GB News, Andrew Neil, this week, you know, this is a good example of how they are a really normie channel when it comes down to it. This week he was he wasn't raging against them, but he was disputing all these doubts about the vaccine and so forth. And he said it's a disservice to the past to refer to what's going on as fascism. And individuals like that, he wants to defer to the past. He wants to talk about World War II and how what's going on now can't be compared to the atrocities of World War II, right? First of all, which it obviously can't, and anyone with common sense can see that, but that's not the point. It's like individuals like him are waiting for Dr. Evil to show up. You know, what they expect is for Dr. Evil to show up in a Nazi uniform and announce that he's about to take over, which is never ever how it happens in history, and that's not even how it happened in Nazi Germany. It's always a gradual erosion of your rights and of your freedoms. That's the way it's always worked. And this is my point against those who say, for example, well, it's just a mask, you know. It's not a big deal to wear a mask in a shop when you go in there for 5 minutes and so forth. And first of all, that's simplifying the issue, because the people in the shop theoretically have to wear them for 8 hours, but be that as it may, you know, the point is that it's bit by bit. So if you concede to wearing a mask, then you're going to be conceding to something else. And if you keep conceding, you wake up one day and suddenly all your rights and all your freedoms are gone because the government has been taking them bit by bit. This is what Alexander Solzhenitsyn was very... I always butcher his surname. You know, I've got a Scottish accent, I really can't help it. But this is what he was really keen to emphasize in the Gulag Archipelago, is that much like some of the sentiments that came out of Nazi Germany, you know, he points out that we should have stopped things early on, because one day we woke up and we didn't recognize the country we lived in, essentially. You know, when they first started coming for our liberties, we should have banded together and fought back. Because at that point we could. Because at that point we had the superior numbers and we were in the position to do so. But by the time the majority woke up to what was going on, the powers that be had essentially neutralized the people, and they were no longer in a position to fight back. And that's as petty as it may seem, that is the importance of resisting even the smallest measures, like the mask mandates. Is that no, we're not going to go down that road. We're not going to go down that slippery slope, because history tells us infallibly exactly where it leads. You know, you want to talk about reading the future. There's many ways you can read the future. There's many ways you can know the future. The easiest of which is just to study the past, because history goes in cycles, which is a very important theme for this episode. But history always repeats itself because human beings always forget the lessons of history. So if you want to know what's going to happen in the future, just look at the past and see the patterns and see which of those patterns are playing out in the present day. And that's the way to know the future. That's the easiest way to know the future. So now, I'm coming up to my break here. There's not much to report on... Well, actually, no, I'm not coming up to my break. I've got a fair amount... Checking my show notes, I've got a fair amount to talk about before that, including the main thing. The end of the age. Right, so this is a big topic. Throughout the mythologies of the world, there there is talk of the end of the world, or the end of an age. The most obvious example, of course, is the Bible. So most individuals, or most Christians, believe that Yeshua prophesied the end of the world, which he didn't. And this misunderstanding stems, frankly, from the King James translation of the Bible, because the King James translation is the most popular version of the Bible, but it's also a very poor translation. It's also a very dated translation. And so if you look at Yeshua's end time statements, he's always talking about the end of the world, which of course most English readers naturally take to be referring to the planet itself. Actually, the word being translated as world there is actually age. It refers to age. So when in the Great Commission, Yeshua finishes by saying, I will be with you all even to the end, I will be with you all to the end of the world, in the King James translation, he actually said, I'll be with you all to the end of the age, not the world. And every modern translation you read will say age, not world, for that reason. And so Yeshua was never talking about the end of the world. He was talking about the end of the age, specifically the Old Covenant period that he lived in, which ended in 70 AD. That's all he was ever referring to. And so there's an example of, a very popular example of this idea that there are ages that end. But of course there are many more examples. There are many who talk about how we live in the Kali Yuga, which is from the Vedic system. The Kali Yuga being the final phase out of 4 in a certain period. And we apparently live in one of those final phases of a set of those 4 periods, which itself is the end of another 4 periods which will usher in the destruction of the world. Now, when the Kali Yuga is supposed to come to an end, well, the estimates range from like 2030 to 2080, things like that. Then, of course, you had the Mayan prophecies of 2012, which everyone was anticipating as the end of the age, even though the Mayans themselves clearly didn't believe that. Because the Mayans, as many Native American peoples did, they believed in this secular time, if you like, the secular time, that things go round in circles. And finally, of course, not finally, I could talk about this for a long time, but of relevance to me is the story of Atlantis, because the philosopher Plato, he wrote about the story of Atlantis in his dialogues, the Timaeus and the Critias, but he said that he heard about the story from his ancestor Solon, who in turn had heard about it from these Egyptian priests in Sais, Egypt. And when Solon was speaking to this priest, the priest said to him, "You Greeks are all like children, for you think there has been one destruction when there has been many." And this priest essentially articulated a very Vedic view of the world, where civilizations rise, there's a destruction, and then there's a regeneration until there's another destruction. Again, a very secular view. So this secular view of the world and the way it operates, how there's a period of growth, and then it's very much like the seasons of the year. You know, you've got the growth in spring, and you've got the flourishing in summer, and then you've got, you know, the fall, winter, and so on. That was very much the ancient view of the world. And I said recently that we are living on the precipice of a great change. You can call it the Kali Yuga, you can call it anything you want, but we are certainly living on the precipice of a great change. And I think that anyone with any degree of sensitivity can kind of feel it. I think, from my experience, even the average person is feeling this change. They somehow sense in their spirit, not somehow, they do sense in their spirit, but consciously they don't recognize it. They don't recognize what they're sensing, but they just intuitively know that great changes are occurring and that things will never be the same again. We are entering into a new era, and things can't go back to the way they were. Now, that's not necessarily going to involve global catastrophes or anything of that nature. I mean, there are always going to be catastrophes, and some are going to be more severe than others. Entire civilizations have provably been wiped out before. I'm not saying that there's definitely going to be great earth changes like that, but we are certainly moving into a new era, whatever that means, and I honestly don't know what it means. All I know is that we are absolutely at the end of this age now, and we're moving into a new world, and I think most individuals are sensing it. Again, they're sensing that things are changing and that we're not going back. And this, of course, brings to mind the story of Noah's Ark. And I've kind of been reenacting Noah's Ark in my life of late. So, of course, you all know the story of Noah's Ark. And Noah was made aware of the flood because he was a righteous man before God. And he was told to take 2 of each kind of animal onto the ark with him in order to spare them. Now, of course, I don't take that story as literal history. I'm sure the story was informed by floods that occurred at some point in history, but the idea of taking 2 animals literally onto an ark, no, I don't believe that. I think that's allegorical. But I've built my own ark of late, or let's just say I already had my own ark, and I've been inviting people onto it, and I alluded to this last week when I talked about that old friend that I'd reconciled with. This friend that I'd grown up with, and we'd fallen out 15 years ago for really silly reasons, and the week before last I just felt, it's time to reconcile with this individual. And part of the reason I felt that is because of this awareness that we're living at the end of an age now, and things are going to move on. Now, again, I'm not saying that we're all going to die, and so we have to make our peace with other individuals and other souls. Now, I don't know that. It's just the way I feel. And so what I was essentially doing was welcoming that girl onto my own ark, which is to say that I think I had a strong sense, and I still do, that if I didn't make peace with the individual now, for whatever reason, I wouldn't get another chat. Sorry, I'm trying not to laugh too much at the chat. I get a strong sense that if I don't make peace with certain individuals now, then I'll never get another chance to again. That's one of the reasons I made peace with that girl that I grew up with. And so this week I've been doing the same. There are other individuals, and again, I've never had a really violent, brutal ending in terms of a relationship with any other soul, but there are certain individuals where things in our relationship didn't end as well as it could, and I feel I've left certain things unsaid to them that I really want to say, and some individuals I would just like to make peace with in the same way that I made peace with that girl that I grew up with. And so this week I've once again been welcoming individuals onto my ark, which is not welcoming them to a physical place, but it's just to say, hey, look, let's be on good terms now. Then you're on my ark. Then I can sail on and wait for the waters to subside and find myself in the new world, and I'll know whatever has happened to you, whatever has happened to me, that we're at peace. So that's what I've been doing this week, inviting people onto my ark. And I think that in future episodes of this show, that's going to be, because we are living at the end of a certain era now, that is going to be a persistent theme, and how we face the changes that are coming upon us. And of course, the most obvious change that individuals are undergoing is that of the lockdown and the pandemic. But I'm not even talking about that specifically. For me, that's just a symptom of the change. I mentioned this change coming in even before the lockdown and the pandemic. That's just a symptom of it. That's just a sign of things to come. There are powers at work in this world trying to ascend, and most of us are just caught in the crossfire, which is no problem for anyone if you're focused on spirituality and mysticism. But it's very interesting to talk about these things and how people are reacting, because a lot of people out there are despairing now when there's really no reason to. And the reason I can say that is because, as I explain in my book, you can't be attached to anything in this world. The Apostle John, expressing it in his very crude Hebraic way, he said, love not the world or the things of the world. The things of the world are passing away. That's his way of expressing a very Zen statement that, you can't get attached to anything in the material realm, whether it's physical possessions or other human beings, because they are mortal, they are matter, and they will pass away inevitably. And if you're attached to them, your attachment will pass with them, and you'll endure suffering as a result. So, I'm saying, I think individuals sometimes misunderstand me because I make a point of not being political, but then I'll talk about things, like things that are going on, and they'll say, wait a second, I thought you weren't being political. Maybe we have different definitions of political, but for me, being political would be if I was coming on here and advocating for a certain political party. If I was getting bogged down in the minutiae of politics, that would be getting political for me. But merely commenting on current events, I don't think is political. That doesn't fit my definition of what political is. No, I live in this world, and certainly if this live stream is to be a topical live stream, I have to comment on what is going on in the world. What's important for me is that you retain that distance from them. You're able to observe them, you're able to see clearly what's going on, but you're not emotionally invested, and you don't therefore incur suffering as a result of them. So that's all I wanted to say as far as the end of this age goes. So now I move on to my big cat adventure, my phantom cat adventure this week, and oh boy, yeah, I don't know where to begin here. I've got some footage to play for you. That's the footage I'm going to show on this break while I go behind the scenes and have a cigarette. And it's a footage of my journey, and I didn't know whether to show you the footage first and then explain what was going on, or explain what was going on before I show the footage. I think the latter would be better, so that when you see the footage, you've got a context for it. So, looking for these phantom cats that my friend and I saw 15 years ago in preparation for my next book is going to be about the mythical creatures of the Highlands of Scotland. And one of those things, the first thing I'm going to focus on in the book is these phantom cats, which, aside from being seen relatively frequently in the countryside, they have their origins in the folklore of the Highlands of Scotland and of Ireland. And I talk about that in the video that I'm going to play. And so this week, what I decided to do was head out to where my friend and I, the approximate location that my friend and I saw the cat. And I was doing it in daylight. The best time to look for cats, whether they're ghosts or real cats, would be nighttime. But I went out in the daytime because I just wanted to get a lay of the land. This was day one, essentially. I wanted to get a lay of the land and see what I could see, essentially. So, first thing to note, and this is important, is that I have been really sick all week. I have been nauseous all week, just really, really nauseous. I'm nauseous right now. So, before I set off, I was feeling nauseous, I was feeling sick in the first place, but I'm the kind of individual that, especially during this pandemic, I've seen the ways that certain other souls, they really micromanage their health. If they're feeling a little bit off, they're running around trying to find out what's wrong with them, is it this, is it that? I'm not like that. All I know is that I wake up on some days, and some days I don't feel as good as I do on most other days, but I don't really concern myself with it. I don't really bother about it. And as long as I'm still physically capable of doing what I want to do, I'll just get on with things. But it is important to note that I was nauseous, because in the video you'll hear my voice is a bit strange. I'm like, and there are certain bits I cut out of my footage where I just had to stop because I was like bending over, maybe being sick. Eurocraft says, just puke and keep moving, bro. Well, exactly. So there are times in the video where I'm just like buckling over. So I cut all of that out, but I'm just saying that because you'll hear my voice is not quite normal. It's a bit weak, and that's why, because I was sick. And so on this day, it was roasting hot, and where's the head and hands? Oh no, he's broken. Had the jab. No, that's not going to happen. On this day, it was Wednesday. It was roasting hot, like roasting hot. Now, first of all, I don't like the heat in the first place, and second of all, I had to wear a big thick jacket, and I had to carry a backpack because I've got all kinds of equipment with me. And of course, I'm going on a relatively long hike, so by the time I even got to this place, it was unbearably hot. Now, I'll show you what the place I was going to looks like on Google Maps. This is the place. Now, it looks like there's nothing there, right? This is what it's like on Google Maps. It looks like there's nothing there. You've got some farmers' fields here, and then you've got this area of wilderness. And it was this area of wilderness that I was really interested in because, of course, cats, they would have dens. They would have, if you've ever had a domestic cat, they like to take shelter. They would like this kind of land. And again, bearing in mind that any kind of feline has an activity radius of about 120 miles, I'm not going out there thinking I'm going to just by chance stumble into a phantom cat, but looking for physical evidence, looking for places where they could conceivably hide. But that's how this place looks on Google Maps. It looks just barren, it looks like there's nothing there, but actually there is something there. Oh, and remember this very rectangular swamp here, because that's going to be seen in the video. So I went out. Misael Romanum says 15 degrees. It was actually 24 degrees Celsius, which may not be hot for many of you, especially if you're over in the United States, but it's ridiculously hot here. So remember that thing I said in a few episodes ago, there's a way to transfer Celsius to Fahrenheit. What you do is you double the Celsius and add 30, I think. So 24, so that'll be 48 Fahrenheit, add 30. So 78 degrees Fahrenheit, if I'm remembering the method to transfer Celsius to Fahrenheit. Anyway, it was too hot for me. I'm a creature of wind and ice and rain. I like the cold. I like the snow. I'm not one for wandering about in the heat at all. So I followed the road out. Now the thing about roads up here is that every road is a country road, and you don't like when there's cars coming your way. There's no pavement to walk alongside the road. If there's a car coming, you have to walk on the road. If a car comes your way, you have to jump into the bushes to the side. So it's not difficult. It's just it's not as convenient as it could be. So I walked out to this place through the country roads, and I passed a farm, what I didn't know at the time was that you could actually get to the place I was trying to get to easily through the farm itself. I didn't know that, so I went the hard way across all these barbed wire fences. Cut myself and my clothes to shreds, my leather gloves cut to shreds, but I made it to where I was trying to get to. And before I know it, I'm on this trail, and this is not some overgrown trail. This is a well-maintained trail. I'm finding stone benches, and you'll see it in the video. I'm finding these affirmations. I'm finding these positive spiritual affirmations pinned up in places. And you saw what the place looks like on Google Maps. It looks like nothing. There's nothing there. But I'm finding all these strange things in this nicely kept path. And I start bumping into other individuals walking this path in that little rough location. And I start speaking to them. Now, I'm going to talk about this after I play the video. Talk about the way to approach things, because I'm straight out asking individuals about big cats. I don't care. I'm straight out asking them, right? So as soon as I encounter someone saying, "Hey, seen any big cats?" Because I don't want to waste time. That's what I'm out there for. I'm just going to ask. The problem is that I'm okay. Picture the scene. You're wandering through a really tight place in the countryside. You're surrounded by hedges. I walk out looking like this, looking even worse actually, because I'm ill, and I've just crawled through barbed wire. I look a right state, so you're immediately thinking homeless person, right? A few tweaks here and there, and I could look like Charles Manson's Scottish cousin. I'm 6'1", so if you encounter me alone in that environment, it could be kind of intimidating, and that's how individuals react to me. They're kind of taken aback, and they're a bit wary of me. And certainly when I go up to them and say, "Hey, seen any giant cats around here?" they don't know what's going on. But that's what I was doing anyway. So I was wandering around asking everyone I bumped into about giant cats. They said they hadn't seen anything, don't know what I'm talking about. Not like that. But no one has seen anything. So I wander through all of these places, this trail, which is clearly well kept by someone, and I return to the farm through another way that I'd passed going along the road. And I bump into these two girls, and I mentioned the cats to them, and they said, no, but go and speak to this guy who owns the farm, and if anyone's seen anything like that or heard of anything like that, he'll know all about it. So I find this couple, the ones who own the farm and who it turns out are maintaining the trail. I end up having a long conversation with them about these giant cats. I explain what I'm doing out there. I explain what I'm looking for. I explain that I'm working on a book, and that is crucial, because what I found when speaking to individuals about, let's say, paranormal activity, is that you can really put them at ease if you have a reason. Like if I was, when the big cat sightings occurred out west, the police investigated because these cats were killing livestock, so the police had to investigate. So if you're a police officer and you go up and ask someone about a giant cat, they won't think twice about sharing information with you, because you're a police officer and you've got a purpose to be there. You know, when you're a guy like me, especially one who looks like me, who just looks like, I don't know, a wild man himself, and he just comes out of the bushes asking you about wild cats, it's useful to have a reason. It's useful to give individuals a reason. And so I did. I said, look, I'm working on a book about this. You can look me up online. You know, I've already got one book out there. You know, I'm not some just weird guy who's here for no reason. I've got a purpose here. So I ended up having this was a really nice couple, by the way. I won't name them, but I ended up having a really nice conversation with them about what I was doing out there and so forth. And it turns out that they maintain this place. What looks like nothing on Google Maps, it just looks like that wasteland you saw, is actually a really lovely, magical country walk, and they're the ones that maintain it. I actually kind of knew that woman anyway, because we've got a mutual friend. And actually our mutual friend is the one who this book is dedicated to, one of the individuals that this book is dedicated to. So they actually maintain the path. So that was nice. So I didn't find anything in terms of big cats, but you know, it was a nice little adventure out there, and I learned a lot about what I would need going forward, especially when things went south as they did. So I mentioned bumping into two girls. I said to them, hey, how do I cross the train tracks to get to the river? Because I want to follow rather than walking along the country road to get back into town, I want to follow the river to get back into town. And this is where things went downhill, because they said to me, that's way too difficult a path, you know, following the river. It's going to take you a long time to do that, and it's a really difficult path. Now, I don't know how old these girls were, maybe late teens, early 20s, but I'm thinking to myself, yeah, sure. Yeah, maybe for you that's going to be difficult, but you know, I'm a veteran of this kind of thing. I'm a veteran of wandering the countryside and this and so forth. So I'm not going to have any difficulties following a river back into town. So one thing to note is that my camcorder sitting over there, it's already started to die at this point, and I don't mean its battery had ran out. I mean that it's several years old now, and it's falling apart, and it's just stopped functioning. And it's really annoying as well, because this couple who run this farm, they have all kinds of great things up there. You'll see in the video I got some footage of some of their geese, but they also have like a Highland cow, which I really wanted to get footage of. They have alpacas, all kinds of things like that. But my camera started dying. It just refused to record. And in the end, it came back intermittently, but I wasn't able to record certain things that I wanted to record, which was really frustrating. But my greatest worry when I was out there was that I was saying to myself, okay, I don't mind if this camera dies now, okay, and I have to get a new camera, but I just hope that I can get the footage that I've already recorded from this camera, because if I've spent like all day out here getting all of this footage, then you know it'll be annoying if I can't actually get it off the camera because the camera's bust. And in the end, I did get it off the camera, but there were some things I just wasn't able to capture because the camera was playing up at the time, which is very annoying, and I'll talk about that more after the video. But let's just say, yeah, that walk alongside the river back into town, it wasn't easy, because at some points there was an easy way to walk along the bank, but at other times there was just no other way but to go in the river itself, which I do. And of course, because it's a sweltering day, I've got this big rucksack on. I eventually took my coat off because it was just getting ridiculously hot. I ran out of water and I had to drink from the river. And the funny thing is, when I was younger, I used to really dislike bugs and insects and creepy crawlies. But of course, I've always been one to go out into the countryside and into the wild and do these things. And what made me get over my fear of insects and creepy crawlies generally is that it's just being out in the countryside, because when you're out in the wilds and you're exhausted and you're roasting hot and you're thirsty and you're hungry and you're tired and you're just lying there in the grass trying to get some respite, you couldn't care less, how many insects are crawling over you at that point. You just don't care anymore. And so by the time I got back into town, aside from the fact that my clothes were shredded, I was soaking wet, I had all kinds of insects crawling over me. I'm sure I'll be finding spiders that I've never seen before coming out of my clothing for the next week now. So that's what enabled me to get over my fear of insects in the first place. It wasn't a particularly arduous... Well, Tate, yes, exactly. That's exactly what I was thinking. Tate says, while trying to film the Loch Ness Monster and the camera dies. You see, my camera started dying when I was leaving the farm to go along the river. And I just had that thought. It's like, I'm probably not going to see anything going along the river, but what if, I'm wandering along the river and one of these big cats comes out and it's right there in front of me. I have the opportunity to get the best footage ever, which, just for the record, I didn't make this clear before because I just assumed that individuals would know me enough to know this would be my intention. I have no intention to capture these things. I have no intention to harm these things. I just want to get proof that they exist. So imagine I'm walking along the river and just by chance, one of these big cats comes out and I get my camera out and I go to film it and it's doing its thing. It's playing up. and I can't get the footage. So I was kind of hurrying home because at this point I don't want to see one. I don't want to see one now because I've got no means of proving it to anyone. So that was the thought that occurred to me at the time. So this wasn't a particularly dangerous escapade. It wasn't a particularly arduous one. There's been far worse situations I've been in, far, far worse. But this was, again, first of all, an unexpected turn of events because I didn't think there was going to be anything out there. And I thought that following the river home would be easier than it would be. And it made me realise certain things about what I'm going to have to do for this next book. And I'll talk about those things when I come back from after showing you the video, after I go on my break. There was something that I did that was very dangerous and that I could have got myself killed doing. And I was going to talk about it, but, and this is important to emphasise to YouTube, I only found out after the fact that what I did was also illegal. So I can't talk about it. But it was one of those, life is full of risks. And life is risk. Anytime you walk out your door, you're taking a risk. And sometimes you're in a situation where you're in a position to take a risk that you don't have to take. And sometimes those risks are worth it and sometimes they're not. This was not a risk that was worth it. And again, I can't tell you what it was, but let's just say it was a stupid risk. I could have been killed, but I took it, and I probably shouldn't have, but I took it and got away with it. And again, I was planning to talk about it, but I found out after the fact that what I did was illegal. Didn't harm anyone, didn't damage anything, but it just happens to be illegal for safety reasons. So I can't talk about it here, obviously. And again, YouTube, I emphasise, I didn't know it was illegal till after I did it. So I'm going to go on a break now and just let you enjoy this footage. So, yes. But we're getting near to the place where we go off into the countryside. I know, it's a strange sight, isn't it? Don't worry, I'm leaving. Oh, they're following me now. The whole herd is following. You realise I'm looking for giant cats, right? You probably don't want to be with me if I actually find one. I'm just telling you, you can follow me if you want. It's nothing personal, it's just for your own safety. My god, that is so inappropriate. Another one. You know, but it was somewhere between that farm and here that we saw the cat, so it makes sense to start here, I guess. Butterfly. I really need a new camera because this one doesn't like zooming in. Okay, I've got a fair amount of climbing to do here. So. Okay, I'm standing in the centre of a stream just now, aka a burn, that's what they're known as around here. But if these giant cats are indeed creatures of flesh and blood, they'll need somewhere to drink, so you definitely want to look for them at night, and your best bet might be to stake out an obvious water source. For example, Thurso River is in the distance that way, so that might be a good place to keep a lookout. Now, if my camera's zoom function behaves, I'd like to show you some nice flowers here. I'm no botanist, not even an amateur botanist, but you know, I can appreciate beauty when I see it. Not sure what the blue ones are called. Okay, I'm going to keep going. Oh. Oh, jeez. I feel like I shouldn't leave any evidence of my presence in case this hammer is used in a murder trial later. I want to get through here, that's for sure. Nice little stone bench here in this little artificial butterfly. There's a note here. Stop being afraid of what might go wrong and think of what could go right. I tore my jeans and my gloves up in the barbed wire back there. This is a really nice sheltered little wood here, so I'm taking a little rest. So to recap, around 15 years ago a friend and I were heading back into town, back into Thurso from our friend's farm, and it was around this area that we saw a massive black cat. It passed about 6 feet before us in the darkness, and it was about 5 feet long itself. It looked to me like a jaguar, and so at the time my friend and I, we had no idea what we'd seen. The animal didn't even glance in our direction, it was as if we weren't there. And so across the years I came to the conclusion that it was some kind of ethereal echo. And I won't go into detail about ethereal echoes, you can read my book, Experiential Spirituality, The Mystic Answer to Everything. I talk about it in chapter 10. But in short, an ethereal echo is what others would call a ghost, but in truth it's not sentient. It's like an imprint upon time of a creature, of a soul that once dwelt in mortal form, whether that mortal form was human or animal. However, there's been many sightings of big black cats. Indeed, in the folklore of both the Scottish Highlands and of Ireland, there's something called the cat seath. That's Gaelic, and it refers to a phantom cat, this big black cat that is said to bring bad luck when it's seen. There's also something called the Suseth, which is the same thing except it's a phantom dog. Something else that's very popular not only here in Great Britain but across North America as well, and indeed across the world. All these things are talked about from, among different peoples. They've ascribed them different names, of course. But out west, there were some farmers who claimed that their livestock, and this was only around 5 years ago, they claimed that their livestock was being attacked by a massive feline, which would seem to suggest that it's actually a flesh and blood creature. Now, there's something called a Kelis, which is a cross. It's the offspring of a domestic cat and a Highland wild cat, of which there are many around here. And the Kelis cats are said to be rather big, and some think they're the reason that the legend of the cat's teeth came about in the first place. And possibly that's the kind of animal that we're dealing with. But until I go out there and find it for myself, as I'm doing now, we'll never know. This is the difference between the book I'm working on now, which is about the different mythical creatures and monsters of the Highlands of Scotland, and my book about spirituality. Is that my book about spirituality didn't require me to go anywhere. This book requires me to go out all over the Highlands and come face to face, or try to come face to face with these creatures of legend, mostly at night. And certainly if you were looking for a cat, whether you're talking about a phantom feline or whether you're talking about some flesh and blood animal, you'd want to be out at night, because cats are most active at night, specifically at dusk and at dawn. I'm out here in the daytime just now just to get a lay of the landscape and to see if I can find any physical evidence, because if such creatures exist, there must be remains somewhere. So ideally I'd find a skull or something like that. The problem is that these creatures, if they're comparable to other felines, they would move, or they would live in an area, a radius of approximately 120 miles. So there's going to be a lot of luck involved if anyone does get a sighting. I was very lucky to get my previous sighting, and I'm very lucky as well that a friend of mine was there to see it with me. I took my jacket off and put it in my backpack. It's got a lot of stuff I need in the pockets though, so that's why I was wearing it in the first place. Look at this. Optimism is a happiness magnet. If you stay positive, good things and good people will be drawn to you. Look at this little frog here. I wonder who's leaving positive affirmations about the place. When you see regular wildcats, this is the kind of place you'll see them, this kind of thick bush, because you'll know with domestic cats, if you've had one, they tend to like to stay under cover. But of course, as I said, if I wanted to encounter one of these creatures, whether they're phantoms or flesh and blood animals, I'd be looking for them at night. Here I'm just seeing what I can see and maybe hoping to stumble upon some physical evidence. Whoa. It's like a little swamp. I had a look at some maps before I left, so this swamp has it allows me to get my bearings, because I remember seeing it. I remember its shape because I thought, well, that's very rectangular. You know, nature doesn't usually isn't usually that symmetrical. I've got two ways to go here. I think I'll go
what I believe is southwest. Whoa, look at the cobwebs on these things. Oh, gee whiz. I'm having to crawl through here practically. Look at these creatures. Oh, I can't believe I stumbled upon geese. This is the real prize. Okay, my camera seems to have come back to life. In time to capture me at a particularly low point. See, I decided to follow the river back into town, which was a huge mistake because, well, the idea was to, go alongside the river, not end up wading through it. But this was a very bad idea. I bumped into two girls back there and I asked them the route to get beyond the train tracks and to the river, and they said, "It'll take ages to get back to town through the river." And I thought, the young girls, they're probably exaggerating. Probably not of the same standards as a veteran of getting dirty and cut like me. But no exaggeration, so I'm just going through this sludge just now. Oh. Okay, we're back on ground that actually looks frequented. That's good. That's good. You know what the worst part is? I ran out of water a while back, and yet I'm surrounded by it. Might not be the best idea to start drinking it though. I mean, it might be okay. You know what? There's only one way to find out. If you're going to drink water from a river, try and get it where it's fast flowing. Okay, this will have to do. Here it goes. Tasted worse. Okay. Now it's time to get home. Been hiking for 6 hours now. Thought this would maybe take 2 or 3. I'm soaking wet and cut all over. Now, these things happen. I'm just at that point now where my energy is nearly gone and you've got to make that final push. That is a truly glorious sight. I decided to stop following the river and just go across the countryside. Almost home. My camera suddenly decided to start working, which is great. Tastes okay. It won't kill me anyway. Somehow it's not satisfying, if you know what I mean. It's just not hitting the spot at all.
Oh, I'm sorry. Always, every single time I forget. Thank you, Neurocraft. Every single time I forget, in the future I'll try and remember. As I was saying, that was just a minor venture, of course, and it was just a kind of off-the-cuff thing. I decided that this week, I'll go out to, at least, because I want things to move forward. I want to get writing this book as soon as possible, so I thought, I'll go out to this place and, just see what I can see. It's not that far. When I said in the video, I've been hiking for 6 miles, that was from town out and back. It wasn't just like from the place and back. But that was just a minor excursion, and I think it was good because I learned things from it. First of all, the camera. Well, obviously I need a new camera now because I can't trust that one. It's not reliable. The last thing I want is to be in a position to capture something amazing and for the camera to fail me. But I don't think I can go on with the handheld camcorder thing because I've talked about it before and I showed you footage before of me climbing a cliff. And I've got my bloody... It's not easy to climb a cliff. It's hard to climb a cliff at the best of times. When you're climbing a cliff holding a camcorder, and as you saw in that video, what I had to do was, when there was a ledge above me, I had to place the camcorder on the ledge, then climb up, pick up the camcorder again, and go on like that. That's just... it's not practical. So I need a new form of camera. Now a GoPro would be the obvious choice, but my thing is that what I like about a camcorder is that I can point and shoot. Anywhere I can do awkward things with it because I'm holding it. I don't know about the flexibility of GoPros because as far as I know, a GoPro is just strapped to you, and maybe it would be okay. I don't know, but I can't continue on carrying a camera about. It's just not practical, and it's definitely going to get me into trouble, especially with the cliff climbing and even going through that river there. There was no danger going through the river, but there were several times where I'm walking through the river and I'm walking on slippery rocks. I'm trying to keep my balance, but I've got a camera in one hand, so if I go down, the camera's gone as well. So yeah, that's just not practical. I need all kinds of new technology. And not just hardware, not just the camera. I need new video editing software. Because I'm still using Sony Vegas 9. It's 20 years old, and it cannot render good. It can't render footage over a certain quality. Like that footage there is relatively low quality compared to the way it is in the camera. Because if I try to render with that video editing software, which by the way was released for Windows XP, and I'm on Windows 10 now, if I try to render using that software, it just crashes. So that's going to be a problem. So even though that was a minor little excursion, nothing major, it really did bring it home that I need to, whenever I'm going out for the sake of this book, looking for big cats, looking for the Loch Ness Monster, looking for ghosts, whatever it might be, I need to be properly equipped. I can't take any chances in terms of not being able to capture something that I see or not being able to get the footage that I took. And of course, as you saw in that footage, you didn't see me speaking to anyone. I cut all of that out. I don't want to put other people on camera, and I wasn't standing there filming them when I was talking to them. I was holding my camera down by my side, and you could hear the conversations, but I don't want to put... They didn't know that. They didn't know that my camera was still on, so I didn't want to put what were essentially private conversations online, so I cut all of that out. But the couple I spoke to who are responsible for maintaining that walk, who own the farm, they said to me, after I explained what I was doing out there, they said, you're welcome back anytime, just go through there anytime you like. So that was really handy. And that's another thing, is that I'm going to have to, another difference between this book and the next book is that I have to get information from individuals. Like the place where it was funny. The place where the big cat attacks happened, which is a place I intend to go in the very near future, I met someone who knows someone who knows someone who knows the person who was actually responsible for reporting that to the police and initiating the police hunt for the big cats. So that's the kind of thing I need to do. I need to talk to people to find out what they know, what they've seen, where they've seen it. And so it's good to form relations like that. It's good for people to know that this is what I'm looking for. So if they get any information or they remember seeing something, I'm the one they tell about it. It's rather interesting when I was talking to that guy, because, again, when you're asking about paranormal things or things that are out of the ordinary, it's okay if you're a policeman because they know you're a policeman and you've got your reasons. But if you're just a guy like I am, it's so useful to be able to say, well, look, you can check me out online. I've already published a book. The reason I'm asking you these questions is for another book, because it does put people at ease. So when I'd established that, this guy I was speaking to, I also evoked the farm attacks that had happened out west. Being a farmer himself, he'd heard of them. Now, what he suggested to me was that, well, there are these massive seabirds up here that live on the coast, and they're big enough to be capable of carrying away small livestock and kittens and things like that. So they could be responsible. And he said something interesting to me. After he'd explained that, he said, but that's not what you're looking for. And I understand why he said that. He said that because I said I was out there looking for big cats. But that's not really true. What I'm looking for is the truth. I'm looking for the truth behind these things. I'm looking for the truth behind what I saw. I'm looking for the truth behind all of the other big cat sightings. I'm looking for the truth behind the farm attacks. If it's not a big cat, and if I find an explanation that's different, that's fine. I just want to know what the truth behind these things is. It's not like I'm going to find the answer to these questions and be like, I'd really love to have stumbled upon a jaguar out here. I mean, I would love to, of course. That would be the most exciting eventuality as far as I can tell. But ultimately, I just want the truth. And if the truth is it's giant seabirds or whatever, that's what I want. So what I learned from that interaction is that I need to make clear to individuals that I'm not looking for a specific answer. I'm looking for the answer. That's very important to establish with people, I think. So yes, it was a nice little venture out there, and I think I'll go out to that place in the next fortnight. Unfortunately, I'd like to go with a reliable camera, and I'm just not going to be able to get a new camera within a fortnight because I want to film more of their livestock. Now, I'd love every single week in this show, I'd love to be able to have footage like that to play for the break, but it's not something you can do every single week. Because even now my boots are sitting on my front doorstep. After 4 days they're still drying off. That's just the way it is. But yeah, it was a nice little venture. I didn't find anything, but I encountered some very interesting people. I was welcomed to wander around their land. And so Tate says, "Truth with a capital T, the Scottish curse." Yes, the truth with a capital T. That's very much what I'm looking for. Another thing that guy asked me is, well, how did you get into this in the first place? And it's something I talk about in this book, which is that, in the opening of the book, I say that, well, my interest in the spiritual began with an interest in the great mysteries of the world, and that it's logical that one should become interested in the spiritual, because it's the mystery from which all other mysteries flow. And that's the way I put it to him, is that, I've said what I've got to say on spirituality, and spirituality is the emphasis, the focus of my life. But I feel that my purpose is to look into these other mysteries, those same mysteries that led me to that greater mystery in the first place. But it's all got to be centered around that spiritual element. And maybe that's the key to all of this, is that when individuals go out looking for these cryptids, these unexplained creatures, whatever they might ultimately be, maybe the key is the spiritual approach. Maybe that's what will make the difference. In my case, is that I have a very specific way of looking at things. So maybe that's going to help in the long run. I don't know. One thing I'll say though, I this is kind of related, which is the subject of normies. What people call normies. Now, what is a normie in internet lingo? A normie is just a normal person. They're the average person. They're someone who, because they're an average person, they stay within certain societally acceptable confines. They're largely conformist, and they don't like to stray from the herd, as it were. And of course, most individuals are normies by definition. I mean, that's what it refers to. And usually the word normie is referred, when it's used in internet social circles, it's usually in the context of politics. So it's usually referring to someone who has political views that are very mundane, that are very standard, that don't deviate from the norm. But the normie thing has implications certainly in the spiritual realms, certainly in the supernatural and the paranormal realms as well, because there are many individuals, and I didn't meet any of them out there, but there are many individuals who would, of course, just think I'm straight up like crazy, straight up insane, that I'm straight up wasting my time for these things. Again, that wasn't the attitude of anyone that I met on Wednesday. They were all very enthusiastic and very interested in what I was doing out there. But yeah, there are going to be individuals who are skeptical or who are doubtful of what I'm doing or think I'm wasting my time. Well, first of all, it's my time to waste. This is what I'm meant to be doing just now because it's a natural extension of what I've always been doing. And second of all, here's the thing about normies, and this is the really important point as far as I'm concerned, is that normies don't do anything. Normies are never the ones to make discoveries. They're never the ones to find anything. And the reason for that is precisely because they are normies. The reason for that is precisely because they're not willing to consider extreme possibilities, and they're not willing to deviate from the norm. It's never normies that make discoveries. It's never normies that do anything of significance. Now, this is not to say that if you're not a normie, that you'll do something of significance. It's not to say that if you're not a normie, you'll achieve something great. But it is to say that if you are, you definitely won't. And so I think a very important thing, and it's something I've known for years, of course, but I think it would be a good point to make in this live stream, is that you can't let the normies dictate what you're going to do in life and dictate the actions that you take, because if you do that, you will become a normie yourself and therefore, by definition, never achieve anything of worth. I have no idea what I'm going to find out there whenever I'm looking for phantom cats or Loch Ness Monster or whatever it is. I just know it's what I've got to do. And let's say, for example, I encountered someone who was very skeptical of the whole thing and just ridiculed the whole thing, and that dissuaded me from looking for these things. Now, there's no doubt that on my deathbed I'd look back and regret that. I let this individual put me off doing what I know I've got to do. So yeah, I say in my book that mystics should be humble, in the sense that not everyone is into spirituality, not everyone is into mysticism, but the mystic, the one who is wise, has to remain humble about that, because this world, and certainly society, needs all kinds to function. So the way I've always expressed it is that, I like cliff climbing. If I fall from a cliff one day and I break my back on the rocks below, it's not going to be a team of mystics that come and rescue me. It's going to be a bunch of average guys who are not focused on spirituality at all. They have their function as well, and God has arranged it so that only a very few people in any generation will be interested in the great spiritual mysteries, or even earthly mysteries for that matter, the supernatural, the paranormal, and so forth. And so it's important to recognize what your place is and not let that seed some kind of arrogance that you're better than everyone else. It's important not to let the normies drag you down, but at the same time not see yourself as superior to them, because they of course serve a function in the world that you yourself couldn't serve. Don't ask me to do any wiring, for example, because I won't be able to do it. So you got to have that balance between being firm in what you know you've got to do, and not becoming arrogant and proud of whatever it is that you're doing, and letting yourself lord over others, as it were. So someone asked me a question in the comments last week, and this is something I've never looked into much, but and honestly, when I saw the question, I didn't understand the question because this is how little I know about this. But I have seen others on the internet talk about it, so let me just see if I can get his exact wording. So this individual asked me, "You wouldn't happen to be an INFJ by any chance?" And he put a little winky face. Now, I didn't know what that was, but I did recognize those letterings. I remember there was some personality test online, and so I looked up what that kind of person was, and I bookmarked it, so I think I did. Yes. So I'm going to read through this and see if this is what my personhood is. So I'm going to read through this and tell you how accurate it is, as far as I'm concerned, of my own way of being. But again, I don't know anything about these 16 personality types. I just know that someone asked me if I'm this one. I want to see how close it compares to my own personhood. So they're partly called an advocate, INFJ. Advocates are the rarest personality types of all. Still, advocates leave their mark on the world. They have a deep sense of... Okay, so this is where I can start commenting on this. They have a deep sense of idealism and integrity, but they aren't idle dreamers. They take concrete steps to realise their goals and make a lasting impact. Well, I'm definitely one who wants to go out there and do things. I've talked many times before about how things shouldn't remain theoretical, and that's especially important in spirituality. You know, you can have as elaborate a theology as you want, but if you're not coming to know God through meditation and contemplation, then you're not really doing anything spiritually speaking. So yes, I'm very keen on taking action. I'm very keen that I don't talk about cryptids and these giant cats that I saw. I'm very keen that I go out there and do what I can do to find out what the truth is behind them. The one bit I'm not sure about is they have a deep sense of idealism, because idealism to me usually refers to like the way the world should be. And I'm not, like when I think of the word idealism, I'm thinking about some kind of utopian vision of how the world should run, which not at all. Because I have a very specific view on the material realm, in that it's a flawed realm because it's material and it can never be perfect, and that's why I think utopians are wrong. Utopians are wrong because they always assume that there's a perfect way to do things in a world that is imperfect. I think that's completely incorrect. So I'm in that sense, I'm not an idealist, and I don't know how else to interpret that term. Advocates' unique combination of personality traits makes them complex and quite versatile. For example, advocates can speak with great passion and conviction, especially when standing up for their ideals. At other times, however, they may choose to be soft-spoken and understated, preferring to keep the peace rather than challenge others. Well, I guess this would be for other individuals to judge. But I don't know about this latter one either, because I can be pretty combative at times. So I don't know. But broadly speaking, I think that's true. Advocates generally strive to do what's right, and they want to help people create a world where others do the right thing as well. See, again, changing the world, every soul has their own mission, including me, and that's my business in the world. I'm not here to fix the world. I'm not here to change the world. You know, if what I discover doing these things helps the world, fine, but it's indirectly. It's not my main goal, to be perfectly honest. I'm just driven to do these things. People with this personality type may feel called to use their strengths, including creativity, imagination, and sensitivity, to uplift others and spread compassion. Concepts like egalitarianism and karma can mean a great deal to advocates. Okay, it got me there. Advocates may see helping others as their purpose in life. See, I'd love to say that was the truth, but I'd be lying. I don't see myself as helping others. I just don't think of it. But this stems from spirituality, where you're not supposed to be attached from the outcome of what you do. I knew I had to write this book. I knew I had to start this live stream. So each week I do these live streams. But in all honesty, and again, I'd love to say it was otherwise, I don't think to myself, you know, when I was writing this book or when I do these live streams, hope I can help a lot of people today. No, I just do them because that's what I feel led to do. I just feel led to do things. If other people are helped by that, then that's great. That's a very positive thing, but it's certainly not my motivation, frankly. As a result, advocates may tend to step in when they see someone facing unfairness or hardship. Many people with this personality type also aspire to fix society's deeper problems. No, not me. In the hope that unfairness and hardship can become things of the past. No, on an individual level, like if I saw 3 guys ganging up on another guy, yeah, that's the kind of situation I would step into. But again, because of my spirituality, I'm not thinking about ways to fix the flaws in the world, because the world is flawed and always will be. Yes, if you can make a positive change with whatever influence you have, you should do that. I'm not advocating apathy, but I'm not someone setting out to create some kind of utopia. Advocates may be reserved, 300%, but they communicate in a way that is warm and sensitive. It's for others to judge, I guess. This emotional honesty and insight can make a powerful impression on the people around them. Well, not that much of an impression, apparently. Advocates value deep, authentic relationships with others, and they tend to take great care with other people's feelings. Okay, this is not me at all. I don't care. There was a time when I did. There was a time where I was a really sensitive individual, and the most important thing in my life was relationship with other individuals. That is not the case now, and honestly, I'm quite often the opposite with other people's feelings, because feelings to me, emotions, I don't need your emoting, and your emoting is of no value to me, and more importantly, it's of no value to you. It doesn't get you anywhere. It's only a detriment. And again, that stems from the spirituality as well. I don't have time for people emoting, and I don't indulge people's emotions. I don't like individuals thinking they can get me to do what they want me to do just because they shed some crocodile tears or they got a sad story. That's emotional manipulation to me. So no, if someone starts emoting around me and they try to use their emotions, express their emotions as a way to manipulate me to get me to do what they want me to do, no, that's probably going to be the end of our relationship. I'm not interested in that at all. And I'm not really concerned about relationships, I'm just not. In fact, I was thinking last night, I was going to make a tweet about this, but I tweeted enough last night, so I didn't. But I noticed that among the trad right, especially the women of the trad right, there's a huge emphasis on families, on starting a family, which is fine. If you want to start a family and you're looking for a man or you're looking for a woman to start a family with, that's fine. But I don't feel that way at all. I just don't. In my own life, I feel like I got that out of my system in my teenage years and early 20s. That was the period where I had my relationships and I had fun with women and so forth. But I've got no interest in having children. I've got no interest in having a family. And and this is no joke, the thought of being out in the countryside in the darkness hoping to see a phantom cat is infinitely more appealing to me than the thought of entering another relationship. It just is. I'm just not bothered by that kind of thing. But the irony is, and I said this on Twitter this week as well, is that in my life, when I was in my teenage years and my early 20s and I was really desperate for a relationship, and I'd go out looking for someone, I'd hang about in pubs just in the hopes of meeting a girl. It never happened. Every single relationship I ever had came about when I was just focused on doing my own thing, and women just entered into my life. And I said on Twitter, that's either because women can sense desperation because they like a man with a mission, or a combination of both. I don't know what the truth is there, but that's just been my experience. So even if I was interested in a relationship, I know better than to go out and try and find one. Just do what you want to do, really. Neurcraft says, well, those were wonderful performances, everyone. David, probably. Okay, where were we? Advocates need to take some time alone now and then to decompress, recharge, and process their thoughts and feelings. No, I don't need to process my thoughts and feelings. No, that's just, yeah. At times, advocates may focus so intently on their ideals that they don't take care of themselves. Well, yeah, I was just saying earlier in this live stream, actually, that I'll be so busy, I'll be so focused on something that I'll just let my surroundings fall apart. And that's why my bathroom and my kitchen this week needed a deep clean. Advocates may feel that they aren't allowed to rest until they've achieved their unique vision of success, but this mindset can lead to stress and burnout. Okay, that is so true. Yes, absolutely. As I said, I'm very single-minded and obsessive about what I'm doing. If this happens, people with this personality type may find themselves feeling uncharacteristically ill-tempered. No, I don't. You know, I used to be infamous for my mood swings in my teenage years and early 20s. But no, I don't suffer from that anymore. And again, it's because of my spirituality, because I'm able to remain conscious. I'm able to remain in my transcendent state of being. So no, I'm not sitting there getting ill-tempered and emotional, and I have to process my thoughts and think through my emotions and agonize over the tragedy of my life. I'm just not doing that. Advocates may find themselves feeling especially stressed in the face of conflict and criticism. No, again, I'm kind of the opposite of that. I'm kind of combative by nature. Not that I go out looking for trouble, but I kind of relish in conflict. These personalities tend to act with the best of intentions, and it can frustrate them when others don't appreciate this. It certainly used to, but not anymore. Again, I think this may be true. This would be more true of me before my spiritual awakening, quite frankly, because a lot of these things are negated by that. At times, even constructive criticism may feel deeply personal or hurtful to advocates. No, I'll tell you something. Revenge of the Cis did a show on Friday, and I still watch Revenge of the Cis. In fact, to a large extent, this show is modelled around them, because back when I said I'm going to make a real effort to do these shows, I contacted Mersh from Revenge of the Cis, and I just wanted to ask him, how do you do this setup? How do you do this? And he was kind enough to write back, and he explained these things. And so you'll see the way my episodes are titled is very, very much yes. On Friday, Mersh and Royce of Revenge of the Cis, they had this guest on. I don't know who he was, but I don't like it when they have a guest on their show. I just don't like it, because what I like about Revenge of the Cis is the dynamic between Mersh and Royce. And if you have a third guest on, you lose that dynamic. And so I'm not the only one who felt that way. And so in the comments, there were individuals saying, well, some were saying we specifically don't like this guest, but others were saying I don't like it when they have guests on full stop, which I agree with. Now, the guy who was their guest, he was responding to these comments, and in one case he left a really long just comment, and it's like, don't respond like that. So, look, and Mersh and Royce wouldn't do this, by the way, but the point is, these individuals are just telling you what they like and what they don't like about your show. It's called feedback, and feedback is very good, because the alternative is that you keep doing things that they don't like, but they don't tell you, so you lose viewers then. People lose interest in what you're doing because you're not willing to receive feedback. So either take the criticism and the feedback and do something about it if you want, or just pretend it doesn't exist and possibly make your show worse. So I've never had any problem with criticism or feedback. In fact, I want individuals to tell me what they like and don't like. In fact, more what they don't like about this show, what it needs more of, what it needs less of, and so forth, because I want it to improve. I don't want it to stagnate, and I don't want it to get worse. So no, I have no problem with criticism at all. Oh, this is what happens when you have the OBS buttons for the screen changes bound to the backwards and forward mouse buttons. Okay, a personal mission. Many advocates feel compelled to find a mission for their lives. When they first encounter inequity or unfairness, they tend to think, how can I fix this? Well, I don't. They are well suited to support a movement to right a wrong, no matter how big or small. Advocates just need to remember that while they're busy taking care of the world, they need to take care of themselves too. No, I don't really have a focus on taking care of the world, but yeah, I certainly do need to remember that, not to obsess so much over, um, not to obsess so much over what I'm doing, and to do the dishes more often, to clean the place more often. That's what I need. But I'm not sitting here agonizing over the state of the world. Again, I think that that personality trait description would have been 300% true of me before my spiritual awakening, and before I came to know so much of what I know and what I talk about in these streams, but not now, because so much of that spirituality negates so much of that personality type. And I didn't look at any other personality types, and I'm not going to, because it seems a bit weird just reading through all these personality types. It seems a bit egocentric to to do that. I'm not going to do that. But yeah, I guess that individual was right. I guess I am that personality type, but a lot of it has been negated by my different approach to things. So I've timed this episode well. I want to conclude by talking about, well, this is something I can't talk about definitively because it's not a subject I'm really, I feel like I'm really there with yet. And that subject is trickster figures, the trickster figures of the mythology around the world. I think they're most strongly associated with Native American mythology, but of course you have the likes of Loki from Norse mythology, and again, these figures appear from all around the world. This is something I did not talk about in this book. And I just, because first of all, I'm not sure I've settled my opinion on these figures yet, and second of all, you've got to stop somewhere. But trickster figures, here's what I think about trickster figures. Okay, so as spirit, we are consciousness, but whereas God is that part of consciousness that is not living an experience of individuality, we are. And that's why, even though we're of the same spirit as God, of the same consciousness as God, we still venerate God. And yes, Hermes would be a perfect example of that, but I'm not going to wear a traditional Celtic attire. So the mystic is one who recognizes that he is, first of all, mysticism by definition is pursuit of unity with the divine. A mystic is one who recognizes, first of all, his unity with the divine, and that he is indeed spirit or consciousness living out a certain role here in the material realm. And that's why I think it's very important not to take yourself so seriously. That's why I wrote the Twitter bio that I did. Paranormal, very cliched, paranormal investigator, cryptid hunter, and so forth. I think if you're conscious that you're spirit or consciousness playing a role, then you can't possibly take yourself too seriously. Now, here's where the trickster comes in, because tricksters are portrayed often as being wise, but also mischievous, and sometimes to the extent that they're malevolent. So here's what my thoughts are on tricksters just now. Again, I've not come to any definite conclusions, but here's what my intuition is telling me, is that tricksters, like mystics, they recognize that they are consciousness playing a role, but unlike mystics, they don't have a function as a straightforward teacher. They're not a Yeshua who's giving a sermon on the mount. They're not Krishna appearing before Arjuna to tell him about how the world works. That's not how tricksters perceive their purpose. Rather, tricksters seem to relish in making fun of those who do take life too seriously. Again, I think they recognize that they are consciousness playing a role, and they love to have fun with those who don't recognize that and who therefore take life too seriously. And I think that would explain accounts of how, yes, they're insightful because they know what the mystic knows, but because they're kind of having fun with it, they're seen as mischievous and sometimes malevolent. And to someone who's not aware of the fact that their consciousness playing a role, yeah, maybe things that the tricksters do are maybe perceived as evil because they do take life so seriously, whereas the trickster's like, it's not that important. When our physical forms die, our consciousness, the spirit that we are, it will find a new form if it's not been liberated or what have you. It would depend on the trickster you're talking about. But that's my suspicion as far as tricksters go. I think they have the awareness of mystics, and that accounts for the insight that is often attributed to them. But they like to have fun with those who don't have that awareness and who therefore take life too seriously. That is my suspicion as far as trickster figures are concerned. I think a big problem here, and it's the same problem you have when you're talking about mystics, is that trickster figures are such a universal phenomenon that it's really hard to talk in generalities about them because there's always going to be exceptions. So I think it's not something I'm going to do, but I think someone could, and maybe they have, I don't know, I haven't checked. I think someone could easily write the kind of book about trickster figures around the world, from around the world, that I wrote about mystics. That's what I think someone could do, and I think that would be a really interesting endeavour, but it's not something I'm planning to do at all. Unlike mystics, however, there are very few trickster figures who, like, if you look down through history, you can look at real individuals that existed and say, okay, that individual was a mystic. Ramana Maharshi, he was a mystic. You know, died in the mid 20th century. A real person we can identify, that's a mystic. Offhand, and again, I haven't done any in-depth study on this, but offhand, I can't think of, looking back through history, I can't think of any historical figures who were known as tricksters. Tricksters seem to be more mythological, like, again, the likes of Loki, Hermes, as red-haired Gibbon mentioned, and sometimes they are kind of obscure. Like when Native Americans talk about trickster figures, they're not talking about special individuals, they're just talking about a kind of individual. So that's another distinction between trickster figures and mystics. But this is the kind of thing I was thinking about at 2 o'clock in the morning last night, and I was tweeting about it. And I unfortunately, I would love to end this show with a definitive conclusion on tricksters and what they're all about, but I can't because I haven't reached such a conclusion. But I will say that I can empathize with the trickster, because sometimes, and because of my new approach to Twitter and other social media, I have been having fun this week. Like I tweeted somewhere that God gave me an exemption for the lockdown rules. Of course, if I say God gave me an exemption for the lockdown rules, I know how people are going to take that. And so I got 2 materialists responding saying, "Oh, God doesn't exist. Oh, you mean your invisible friend gave you an exemption for the lockdown? That's nice." Kind of thing, which is how I knew they would respond. But that's what gives me sympathy for tricksters as I perceive them, because sometimes you can't talk to other individuals in your language. And so I say in my book, and I'll read it here if I can find it, that sometimes I just I'll just say things that I know perfectly well won't be understood. See, it's got to the point now where I'm forgetting where things are in my own book, which I'm kind of grateful of, because it allows me to read it with fresh eyes, as if I'm not the one who wrote it. But it must have been adjustment. So sometimes I'll say things to individuals that I know they won't understand for different reasons, and I can empathize with tricksters the way I perceive them, because sometimes you're wasting your time, and why not have fun with it? So here's what I say in chapter 8 of the book. Yeshua often spoke to the crowds that gathered around him in parables that he knew perfectly well that they would not understand. The reason being that it was not yet time for them to understand. You see, Yeshua is a very specific case in that he didn't want the crowds to understand. It wasn't their time to understand, and that's why he spoke to them in parables. So Yeshua was in a unique position in that sense. For different reasons, I will likewise often make statements that I know perfectly well will be misunderstood. For example, I might say that God tells me what to do from moment to moment, knowing that most secular souls will assume me to be insane. I do this despite knowing that if I were to instead say, I live according to my conscience and intuition, then my words would be far more acceptable to them. If a soul genuinely seeks understanding, then they will inquire further about statements that are confusing to them instead of responding with ridicule, and so I deliberately make statements that, while true, I know will sound bizarre to the majority of souls in order to determine which of them are open to greater understanding. This naturally leads to most souls thinking of me as strange at best, but if I was concerned about how the world perceives me, then I would have no business writing a book of this nature. And so that's why I'll happily say, yeah, God gave me an exemption as far as the lockdown rules are concerned, because firstly, it's true. What I'm really saying there is that my conscience isn't telling me that I have to abide by all of these things. My conscience doesn't condemn me for not doing those things. Therefore, I have approval from God. But of course, if I just say, God gave me an exemption from the lockdown, I know that people aren't going to understand it in those terms, and that's fine by me, and it's also a little bit fun. So I think that's the key to the trickster figure. I think that they have the awareness that their consciousness playing a role, but their emphasis is not on sharing that message with others. It's on having fun with those that take life too seriously. It all ties together, and this is why I kind of thought I could write about tricksters in this book, because they are kind of related, but nah, I'd already written about too much, and I had to stop somewhere. And Eurocraft says, Tate says, and Daniel Banderas in Indiana Jones 5? Yeah, he's been cast now, no idea about the role. Harrison Ford still isn't on set. They've got a stunt double down there, which looks nothing like, down in Glasgow I mean, which looks nothing like him, so I guess they're going to CGI him. Boy, I hope they get that CGI right, or it's going to be a disaster, that's for sure. Eurocraft says, trick is dolos in Homeric Greek, and the oldest known use of the term refers to a quite specific trick, baiting a hook to catch a fish. And that's a quote from Trickster Makes This World, Mischief, Myth, and Art. See, there is a lot to this, but what you don't want to do, and I think this is something that a lot of individuals do, including here on YouTube, is that they venture outside of their area of expertise. You know, I know what I know about, and I'm not going to start talking about chemistry and things that I don't know about. Actually, you see this a lot in academia, is that academics often feel that, perhaps because they've got a nice title before their name, they often feel that they can speak with authority on fields that they're not trained in, that they're not well informed in. And it's okay for everyone to have an opinion on everything, of course. The question is, how well informed is that opinion? And I'm not about to start making definitive statements about the trickster figure when I really haven't studied the matter that much, and when others have. That would be the height of arrogance. I'm just sharing my intuition and my suspicions on the subject, but I've been going for 2 hours and 15 minutes now, so I think this would be a good place to stop. I think this was a relatively full live stream. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next week.